Good morning, Year 7s. This is Miss Lawson bringing you our third week of reading our book together. Place called Perfect. The PDF is available. I have put it on Teams if you want to follow along. But with these videos, I put it on the visualiser just as I do in class. We can read it together. So we are about to start chapter 4. I will link the other videos down below so you can watch the first video and second and kind of catch up if you've not been following along. So essentially it's about a girl called Violet, and her and her family have moved to a new town, and things are not as they seem, and obviously we're linking it into dystopia. We're looking at an alternative world where things are the worst case scenario essentially, and there's lots of conventions that are linked in with dystopia, which can be evil people in control, surveillance, watching people, controlling people, mind altering substances, and so on. And so this book ties in really nicely, and it's not as full on as something like 1984, which is some of the extracts we've looked at so far. It is definitely made for your age range. And it is a really good book. We haven't really come across the boy very much. The very first chapter we come across the character called Boy. He's quite integral to the story as the story goes on. What we have come across is the fact that Violet and the family, like I said, have moved to this new town. But they've moved there because Violet's dad is an ophthalmologist, and he's there to treat eyes because everyone in the town is blind. And in order to be able to see, they have to wear these special glasses. When they do put these glasses on, everything seems wonderful and perfect. And we talked about the saying last week about the rose-tinted spectacles. It's a saying. And actually, when she puts these glasses on, everything just looks marvellous and wonderful. So it's that idea, that irony that actually is everything okay, because I can tell you with inside information that it's not. Okay, so that's a form of irony written by the author called Helena Duggan, if you want to get it. You can find it online. Like I said, I have got the PDF. So let's get cracking with no more procrastination. That's the word. You can tell it. Wednesday. Right. So we are on chapter 4. And thank you to those of you that helped me last week with reading. Next week I'm going to do the same with other people who help reading. But this week, technology and time and so on hasn't quite permitted it this week, so let's get cracking. Okay, and remember the Archers are the weird brothers, aren't they? The Archers had given Violet's dad the day off to settle in, so the family decided to head into the town and have a look around. The best way to see Perfect was on foot, Edward Archer had said as he dropped them home, so that's what they decided to do. They changed out of their pyjamas and had a quick breakfast, and then Violet led her parents down the driveway. Rose stopped at the bottom and gasped, "Isn't it beautiful, Eugene?" They were surrounded by mountains. Greenish hills went to the front, and blue mountain peaks loomed high behind them with nothing else for miles around. Perfect sat in the middle of the ranges, as if the scoop had been taken out of them, leaving just enough space for the town. On the journey yesterday, Violet had the distinct feeling that they were driving into the middle of nowhere. Now she knew she was right. After a few short hours, she was already used to wearing her glasses. In a strange way, it was like they'd been stuck on her face forever. Everything was now crystal clear, and she had to admit the view was kind of nice. The house was on the edge of the town, and at the bottom of a long tree-lined avenue, and as they walked, Violet noticed the trees were exactly the same distance apart. She measured them by counting her steps. After walking for a few minutes, they turned left off the avenue, and the town centre came into view. A black iron plaque high on the wall of the building read, "Splendid Road." The road was narrow and lined with 3-storey red brick buildings, and it ran the whole way to the Archer Brothers Opticians, which stood out like a beacon ahead of them. As they walked towards it, Violet noticed that every door on the street was painted black, and the window blocks of flowers decorated every sill. They reached the optician's shop, and the steps in front reminded Violet of where she had bashed her toe earlier that morning. Now she saw the stone building in all its glory, sparkling gold letters proudly spelling out Arthur Brothers Spectacle Makers Emporium above their navy-painted door. To the left of the emporium was a high stone wall. To the right was a street of stone buildings which seemed to be filled with shops. Another black iron plaque high on the wall read, "Edward Street." "Isn't it beautiful, Violet?" her father smiled. "I love these old walled towns. Lots of history." Violet held her silence. History was her least favourite subject in school. The family continued on to Edward Street. and they walked past the Hatchett family butcher's 3 doors down from the optician's and received a big hello from a man in a white hat with a red striped apron and gold-rimmed spec. He had greeted them by name, which was odd, because they definitely hadn't been introduced. "It's a small town, Rose. Something we'll have to get used to," her father had said, when her mother questioned the friendliness of the locals. "Oh, I think I'm used to it already, Eugene. This place feels like home. It's what we've been searching for. I'm so glad you brought us here." What? Violet's mother hadn't liked the thought of moving. She'd said loads of times that she was only doing it for the good of the family. She's changed her mind quickly. "I think we've made the right choice, Eugene," her mother smiled, squeezing her husband's hand. Her dad beamed and kissed her mum's forehead outside Sweet Patisserie, the baker's shop. Violet cringed. These were a stranger in the town. Firstly, everyone wore glasses, the same rectangular, gold-rimmed, rose-tinted style. The streets were perfectly clean and orderly. There wasn't any rubbish floating about, not even a single street wrapper. There was no chewing gum stuck to the black benches that lined the footpaths, and not the tiniest bit of graffiti on the walls. The people were all skinny and thought that they weren't really alike, that there was something similar about each person they passed. It was like a gloss or shine. Somehow everyone glowed. "They're healthy, Violet," her father said when she brought it up. "The archers told me this is rated the healthiest town in the world." It was definitely true. There wasn't a Chippers anywhere, and she loved fish and chips on a Sunday evening. It was a Brown family tradition. She noted that down at another black mark against the town. While her parents were busy chatting to another local who knew them by name, Violet quietly slipped away. She passed by the town hall, an old building with 4 stone columns decorating its facade. Violet stopped and craned her neck to get a better look at the huge clock tower that sat on the top of the hall's slated roof. She imagined it was possible to see the whole town and the mountains from up there. Next to the town hall was the Archer's tea shop, painted in the same navy and gold colours as the tea packet, which lay empty on the kitchen table from the night before. A little further down Edward Street, Violet noticed a lane off to her left. High up on the wall was another black iron plaque which read Archer's Avenue. She turned off the main street onto the spotless cobbles. The right-hand side of the avenue was lined with 2-storey stone houses, whilst on the left was a tiny, almost hidden passageway which appeared to run down by the back of the shops that faced onto Edward Street. The passageway, called Rag Lane, was dark, shadowed by the back of the shops on the left, and a high stone wall on the right. It was uninviting too, unlike everything else she had seen in Perfect so far. Something about it drew her in. A little nervous, she walked down the narrow passage, stopping at regular intervals to see if anyone was watching from the shadows. Her heart was racing, but she kept going. It was the only thing in the town that wasn't so perfect. It felt as if she was starting to walk downhill when the lane sloped a little to the right as she came to a dead end. She turned around to go back and noticed she was behind the tall town hall. The glass windows of the clock tower loomed high above her. She returned to the start of the passageway, and instead of turning right towards Edward Street, she kept the wall on her left and decided to explore further along Archer's Avenue. One of the stone houses on the right-hand side of the avenue had another black iron plaque, and she crossed the cobble dash to read it. The original home place of Messrs. George and Edward Archer, first sons of Perfect. There was something else scratched in above the lettering. It was very faint, but she could just make out the words "and William" roughly scrawled into the sign. Must have been the same Archers, but she hadn't heard of William. She peered through the window beside her, curious to get a look at where the Archers were born, and as her nose brushed the glass, her face zoomed forward from the darkness inside. An old woman stared out at her. Her skin hung so close to her skull that her blue eyes seemed to jump from her face. Her white hair wasn't exactly messy, but it wasn't tidy either, and she hated brushing, like she hated brushing hers too. Her grimace was gapped with missing teeth, and there was something else about her, something Violet couldn't put her finger on. Shocked, Violet turned and raced back up towards Edward Street. In her haste, she tripped over a loose shoelace, knocking off her glasses, and as she fell onto her knees to search the cobblestones, laughter echoed round her. It was the same haunting laughter she'd heard in the driveway the night before. Finding the frames, she frantically shoved them onto her nose and sprinted back onto the main street. She spotted her parents outside the Archer's tea shop. "Oh, there you are, Violet," her mother smiled. "Will you have a pot?" Violet nodded, catching her breath. Her mother pushed open the door of the tea shop and a bell chimed in the corner of the store. The wall behind the counter was lined with wooden shelves all filled with navy and gold packets of tea that bore the Archer's portrait. Navy and gold mugs, tea strainers and pots hung from hooks in the rafters, and beautiful upturned wooden tea chests served as tabletops around the shop. "Take a seat by the window," her mother said, as she headed for the counter. Violet and her dad sat down at the table looking out at the pretty streetscape. To cover the awkward silence between them, Violet pretended to be engrossed in people watching. Rose came over with a tray in one hand and an ornate tea chest in the other. "What's that for, Mum?" Violet asked, eyeing the chest. "It's for the tea, man, Violet. The woman behind the counter told me everyone in them has them imperfect. You leave them at your door, and the tea man drops your daily supply in it each morning. Isn't it beautiful? The tea is delivered fresh every day, you know, just as the Archers said. No wonder it's so tasty. They're so nice here, and the prices aren't too bad either, Eugene." Rose smiled, patting her pocket. Eugene hadn't heard a word and continued to look out the window as Rose began to pour the tea. "Mum," Violet said. "Yes, Pet?" "My glasses fell off the avenue just down there," she pointed in a general direction, "and I heard someone laughing at me. I heard the same voice last night when we arrived. I think someone's following me." "Violet," Rose smiled, wrapping her arm around her daughter. "Yes, Mum? You know your imagination runs away with itself, Pet. You're just like your father," Rose said, nodding at Eugene, who was still daydreaming through the window. "But, Mum, I really did hear someone. What if it was a ghost or a monster or something? I don't think I like this town." Rose laughed. "You're always jumping to the craziest conclusions. You'll be fine, Violet. What could go wrong in a beautiful place like this?" She kissed Violet's forehead and rubbed a hand through her hair. "Now have some tea, Pet." Violet did as she was told, trying to shake the voice from her head. Why didn't her Mum ever listen to her? What if it really was a ghost or something? She stared out of the window at the picture-perfect people walking by and took a sip from her cup. Vanilla heaven floated over her tongue and she forgot all her worries. Maybe tea was the answer to everything. Right, well, lots to be picking apart in that so far, isn't there? Essentially, we've just found that there's a third brother. We originally met the two brothers originally, and they're the men that are wearing the brown suits and the brown shiny shoes. And they're still drinking this tea. This tea is integral to the story because, as you will find out, like I said, it's like a mind-altering tea. It makes them feel and think things that they wouldn't normally do. And it's interesting that she hears this laughter, this kind of strange laughter that she'd heard the very first night. So maybe someone is watching, is following. It's interesting how throughout these whole books, actually, Violet is the one that seems to see through things, and we as a reader, we get to have this take on the situation through Violet. She is one of the main protagonists, and through her narration of what her alternative take on the town, we get to see that actually there's little glimpses, little bit of a sense of forewarning, foreboding for us. We talked about that in our last lesson about warning. Next lesson, you are going to be talking about characters and typical characters you're going to come across in dystopia, and you're going to get to create an evil character. So hopefully something from this book perhaps has inspired you, and you might feel like writing something very similar. I will come back next week with another chapter. If you want me to read more, just let me know. I'm absolutely here for any kind of discussions on this book. I really, really like this book. And yeah, I just like reading with you. So hopefully everyone's okay, and I will speak to you soon.